I want to be clear about something before I explain what happened at Ceth processing block. I was there to audit nutrient yield documentation. That's it. I had a clipboard, a portable scanner, and 47 outstanding discrepancy flags across 6 months of protein batch records. I was not there to make friends. I was not there to cause trouble. I filed what I found, the way I always file what I find, and what followed was not my fault. The station was an orbital industrial facility, Ceth, sitting in the dust halo of a dead moon called Ceth's Reach. It processed synthetic protein slurry for distribution to 11 colony clusters and had, based on my preliminary review, been systematically understating batch loss figures for approximately 4 years. The facility director, a compact and very precise woman named Ceth Volume 50, met me at the docking collar on my first morning with a handshake and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, and I recognized immediately that she was the kind of institutional official who had never in her professional life received a non-conformance citation she couldn't bury. I filed my first one on day 2. The second followed 3 hours later, and by the end of day 3 I had a stack of 8, all of them backed by documentation I'd pulled directly from her own servers, and Ceth Volume 50 had stopped smiling entirely. Here's the thing about compliance audits. I have been doing them for 22 years. I have audited protein processing facilities, water reclamation hubs, atmospheric management contractors, and 3 separate orbital waste disposal operations. I have filed non-conformance reports against a territorial governor's brother-in-law and a contractor who was simultaneously on the IWC regulatory board. I have never once found a faster way to determine a facility director's real character than by filing a citation they can't immediately dismiss. What they do in the first 48 hours tells you everything. Ceth Volume 50 called her legal team within 30 minutes of my second report. Within an hour of my 5th, she had requested a formal review of my auditor credentials, a process that takes a minimum of 3 weeks and accomplishes nothing, but signals intent. By the evening of day 3, when my 8th citation had gone upstream to the IWC compliance registry, she stopped responding to my communication requests entirely. I kept working. The staging chamber was on sublevel 4, adjacent to the secondary processing floor where I had been cross-referencing batch logs against physical yield inventories. I was aware it existed. The facility manifest listed it as a compliance management resource, which is the kind of bureaucratic phrasing that can mean almost anything, and I had noted it in my intake documentation without paying it much attention. I should have paid it more attention. On the morning of day 4, I arrived at the audit table I had been using, set down my scanner, pulled up my documentation queue, and was 3 items into a discrepancy flag on batch loss coding when the door to the sublevel staging chamber opened. I heard it before I saw it. Not a sound exactly, more a pressure change, a very faint tightening of the air in the room, the way a space feels when something large and heavy has shifted its weight. I looked up. The Vreth was approximately 2.5 meters at the shoulder and nearly 4 meters long, not counting the tail. Its body was plated, not fur, not scales exactly, but interlocking panels of something dense and dark, deep grey-green shading to near black at the spine, with a dorsal ridge that ran from the base of its skull to the root of the tail in segmented amber plates that caught the overhead light and threw it back in slow pulses. It had 6 limbs, 4 for locomotion, massive and deliberate, and 2 shorter forearms that are held slightly elevated, clawed, and precise. Its head was broad and low-slung, and the eye ridge above its eyes bioluminesced faintly, the same amber as the dorsal plates, warming and cooling with each slow breath. It stood in the open door to the staging chamber and looked at me. I looked at it. Then I looked back at my discrepancy flag, because batch loss coding doesn't reconcile itself. I became aware, after a few minutes, of faces at the reinforced viewport that looked in from the corridor above, 3 handlers in station livery, standing very still, and behind them, Ceth Volume 50. She was watching me the way people watch a structural test they expect to fail. I noted this and went back to my work. The Vreth entered the room. It moved the way very large things move when they are entirely confident in their environment. Not fast, not slow, just thoroughly present, with the specific unhurriedness of something that has never once needed to hurry. It crossed the audit floor in a wide arc, close enough to my table that I felt the displacement of air, close enough that the amber pulse of its eye ridge passed across the edge of my scanner like a breath of warm light, and I finished the notation I was on and reached for the next file. I found out later that Unit Ceth, that was the facility's designation for it, a compliance instrument assigned to the station 12 years earlier, officially reclassified from biological asset to operational equipment in year 3 of its deployment, had a protocol file running to over 400 pages. It had put 3 handlers in the medical bay. It had twice refused to re-enter its staging chamber for a period of days at a time, requiring the quarantine of Sublevel 4 and a consultation with the species management contractor who had supplied it. It had never, not once in 12 years, behaved in a manner that could be described as selecting a human. It selected me at approximately 0940 on day 4 of my audit, by which I mean, it circled the room twice more, very slowly, and then it lay down beside my audit table. I'd like to say I handled this with great equanimity, but honestly I didn't have much of a reaction because I was trying to reconcile a 6-month batch loss variance that didn't add up, and the Vreth lying down wasn't interfering with that. It was a large and apparently calm animal. It smelled of something mineral, like warm stone after rain. It breathed slowly. After a while I became accustomed to the amber pulse of its iridge in my peripheral vision, regular as a clock. I heard, from the corridor above, what sounded like a Ceth Volume 50 giving instructions in a rapid, low voice. 2 of the handlers came in through the side access door. They had a control rod each, standard compliance management equipment for the Vreth, per the protocol file I later read, and they approached it from the far side of the room, and Unit Ceth tracked them with its eyes without lifting its head, and neither of them got closer than 4 meters before they stopped. They stood there for a long time. Then they left. I kept working. Lunch. I ate at the audit table. I had a ration pack in my kit bag, the kind with the self-heating strip, and I pulled it out and ate it without really thinking about it, because I was in the middle of a batch coding sequence and I didn't want to lose my place. Unit Ceth watched me eat. Its iridge pulsed twice, warmly, and then it put its head down on its forelimbs, which in retrospect was probably a significant behavioral indicator, but I'm an auditor, not a xenobiologist, and at the time I noted it the way I note most things that aren't directly relevant to what I'm documenting. I noted it and moved on. At some point in the afternoon, the handlers tried again. Different approach this time, only one handler, with a different piece of equipment, something I didn't recognize. The Vreth raised its head, watched the handler cross half the room, and then it shifted its body so that it was lying between the handler and me. The handler left. I kept working. The third attempt came at around 15:30. 2 handlers again, with a third standing in the corridor access above as what I assumed was a retrieval backup, and this time they had brought something that produced a low-frequency vibration. I felt it in my back molars before I heard anything. That was, I gathered from the way they positioned themselves, supposed to encourage the Vreth to move toward the staging chamber door. Unit Ceth turned its head toward the sound, considered it for approximately 4 seconds, turned its head back, and looked at me. I nodded, the way you nod at someone who has asked a reasonable question and received a reasonable answer. The handlers stood there for another 3 minutes and then withdrew. By 1700 I had cleared 14 discrepancy flags and added 3 new ones, and Unit Ceth had moved its head so that it was resting across my boots. I became aware of this gradually, the way you become aware of small changes in a familiar environment. The weight settled in slowly enough that I hadn't noticed the transition. I looked down. The amber plates of its iridge pulsed. I looked back at my screen. There were 7 people in the corridor viewport by then. Ceth Volume 50 was not among them, which meant she was somewhere dealing with this through other channels, and I filed a brief update to my upstream audit log noting that compliance management resources had been involved in my audit environment and that I had no outstanding concerns about the conduct of my review. The update hit the IWC registry at 1714. I learned later that Volume 50 had attempted 3 separate channels over the course of the day: a formal complaint to my regional oversight office, a request to the species management contractor for emergency behavioral intervention, and a request to station security to remove me from the audit floor on grounds of undocumented risk exposure. The oversight office forwarded her complaint to my supervisor, who forwarded it to me with a 1-line note that said, essentially, keep working. The species management contractor informed her that emergency behavioral intervention for a Vreth involuntary contact posture would require a minimum of a 4-day consultation and wasn't guaranteed to achieve anything. Station security declined to remove me on grounds that I showed no signs of distress and had not requested assistance. I hadn't. I was fine. On the morning of day 5, Ceth Volume 50 came to the audit floor herself. I'll give her this. She was not a coward. She came through the main access door rather than the corridor above, and she walked halfway across the room before she stopped. Unit Ceth raised its head. I went on annotating the file I was on. Mr. Vask, she said. Director Volume 50, I said. There was a pause. She was looking at the Vreth. The Vreth was looking at her. Its dorsal ridge had brightened, the amber pulses coming faster, sharper. The compliance review is concluded, she said. We'd like you to complete your processing and depart at your earliest convenience. I have 11 outstanding flags, I said. I expect to be here another 3 days. Another pause. I could hear her breathing from where I sat today. Unit Ceth needs to return to staging, she said. I looked up at that. I looked at the Vreth, which was still watching Eshet Volume 50 with a quality of attention that I would describe, having now read the protocol file, as evaluative. I looked back at Volume 50. Ceth, I said. Quietly. The way you say something when you aren't asking. The Vreth stood. It moved to the staging chamber door, which was still open, and walked through it. The door closed. Eshet Volume 50 stood very still on the audit floor. She was looking at the closed staging chamber door, and then she looked at me, and I have seen many things in 22 years of compliance auditing, but I will say that her expression in that moment was one of the more instructive things I've witnessed. I picked up my scanner. I'll have the preliminary findings report uploaded by end of week, I said. I finished the audit in 3 days, as estimated. My final report included 23 non-conformance citations, 2 systemic fraud referrals, and a supplementary note on Ceth Marin's deployment practices for classified biological compliance resources, which I forwarded to the IWC Species Welfare Division as a matter of procedural completeness. Eshet Volume 50 filed a counter-report against me within 24 hours of receiving my final document. It was, I will say, thorough. It alleged interference with facility operations, unauthorized interaction with classified compliance equipment, and what she described as willful escalation of regulatory proceedings without proportional cause. The IWC Compliance Board reviewed it in 6 weeks. They dismissed the interference count. They dismissed the unauthorized interaction count, noting that no interaction had been documented. The Vreth had moved under its own volition, and my conduct throughout had been to continue performing my audit. They forwarded the willful escalation count to my regional office, which reviewed my citation log, reviewed my documentation, and closed the matter with a note that the citations were well-founded and proportionate. The Ceth Marin Processing Block's operating license came up for renewal 3 months later. The IWC Review Board added a species welfare audit as a condition of renewal. Unit Ceth was reclassified. I heard about it later, from my regional coordinator, who sent me the notice without comment. The reclassification moved it from compliance instrument to protected non-sapient asset, pending a species behavior review that the species management contractor estimated would take approximately 18 months. During the review period, the asset was to be housed in an expanded facility environment with access to natural light simulation and enrichment resources. I thought that was probably right. I've been asked, a few times since, what I did, what I said to it, what I knew, why it didn't kill me. I tell them the same thing each time. I didn't do anything. I filed non-conformance reports. I ate my lunch. I said its name once, at the end, and it decided that was sufficient. The only question worth asking about Unit Ceth is not why it sat down beside me. That part is simple enough. It recognized something. What it recognized, I couldn't say with any precision. I'm not a behavioral specialist, and I'd need a longer credential than I have to explain the internal calculus of an apex predator selecting a middle-aged protein auditor as something worth staying beside. What I can tell you is what Eshet Vol's face looked like when a thing she deployed as a weapon declined to perform. That Part 1 understood completely.